Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Tales of the 2S LGBTQ. My name is Douglas Parsons. Chris Lamarca is my guest today, and I've been looking forward to chatting with her for so many reasons. I first came across Chris in an online forum decrying the province of Alberta's changes to the K-12 curriculum. The provincial government doing what seems all conservative right-wing governments do in providing shoddy work, which of course will affect the children. I realize that she is family, the Rainbow family. And in learning more about her, found out that she has a story to tell, a unique story, a story that's brought me down the rabbit hole of research. And there's so much information with things that she is experiencing at the moment that I need to make heads and tails of it myself. And so, of course, why not bring Chris to Tales of the 2S LGBTQ plus to talk more about it? Information, insight is always good, especially when it comes to health. But Chris is more than just what she's experiencing health wise. She identifies as being queer. That intersection between queerness, where is it? How do you talk to queer youth as an educator? There's so much that we can talk about here today. I'm just excited to get to know this Facebook acquaintance who I actively seek out information on because I'm curious, intrigued, and want only the best for her. So today on Tales of the 2S LGBTQ+, I'm going to talk to Chris Lamarca about a multitude of ideas and suggestions for life itself. So that's today on this podcast. I would like to say that this podcast emanates from Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, and I wish to acknowledge that I learn and work on Treaty 6 and Métis ancestral land. My guest today, Chris, comes to us from Treaty 7 land around Calgary. Treaty 6 territory is the traditional meeting grounds, gathering place, and traveling route to the Cree, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, Dene, and Nakota Sioux. I wish to acknowledge all of the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit whose footsteps have marked this land for territory for centuries, especially the elders and knowledge keepers who are with us today and those who have come before. This is where we will continue to strive to honor and transform our relationships with each other. And I hope you are on this journey that I am on as we begin to learn more of what is the truth. Today on Tales of the 2S LGBTQ+, I'm thrilled to be able to talk to Chris Lamarca. And it's at this time now that I bring her to your screen. Chris, welcome.
Hello, Douglas. Thank you so much for having me. And before we start, can I say thank you for all that you do for the community, for queer youth? I listen to your podcast and I just hear how much passion that you have for young people, for people who are often overlooked. And I feel like a kindred spirit there. I love it.
Oh, thank you, Chris. I appreciate it. That's very kind of you. We are teachers, and no matter if we are in those four walls of the classroom, our hearts are there. Those kids become our kids, and we battle for them. And when they become adults, we continue to battle for them. Even if they don't feel they need that help, we're there no matter what.
Yeah, and that's so true. I'm Facebook friends and friends in real life with a bunch of my former students who are now grown-ups with kids, and they still will message me and say, "Hey, can I have your advice on whatever it is?" And a huge part of that was the queer community of kids who were just so amazed to find a teacher that was like them. Where I actually had a student come up to me years ago and said, Miss Lamarca, I never thought I could be a professional. I never knew I could have like a real job and a life and all these things until I met you. And I saw this open queer teacher who just unapologetically was herself. So we can, as queer teachers, being open, make a huge difference.
So you talked about being yourself and being authentic. When did you know inside the classroom that you were genuinely being authentic and not just playing a character or a role?
Oh, so for me, it has always been extremely important for me to be open, to just be myself. And that includes, like, I've got full sleeves of tattoos. And so I just always, the second I came into the classroom, I said, I am going to be me because I can't expect a student to ever share what I want them to share, to be authentically themselves, unless I'm doing that myself. So, cards on the table, I just was who I was. The second I walked into a classroom, when I was in my practicum, I had a really uncomfortable experience with an administrator who told me to keep it about the curriculum, and I wasn't allowed to. At the time, I was married to a woman, and I wasn't allowed to say that. And I thought to myself, well, this is odd, because the teacher introduced themselves to the class with a slideshow of her husband and kids and dog and family, and I'm supposed to pretend I don't have that. And so that was a moment I was like, ew, gross, no, not going to fly. And I was told by a bunch of other queer teachers and professors and stuff, until you have your years in and you're settled and you have a good contract, don't, openly say that you're queer. And I said, nope. In my interview, my very first interview, I said to my principal, I am openly queer. I hope that's not a problem. And his response was, of course not. No big deal. As most administrators are amazing with it. It's not an issue most of the time. So from the first day in the classroom, I was just me, and I had to earn my reputation. So my first year teaching, I was at a great school. It was very heteronormative, very Caucasian, very upper class. And so it was very different. And then my second year teaching, and from then on, I was teaching in more urban schools with a lot more diversity and a higher queer population. And I really found my home in that community. I felt so welcome, so much, in fact, that I moved myself to that community so I could be closer to the school, the people, just like the amazing community.
I completely jealous. My experience was very different than you. I did come out after high school. This was 93, 94, 95. I began teaching in Swan Hills in 1998, and I immediately went back into the closet. And I was there for the 3 years I taught, not just in Swan Hills, but also my year in Red Deer at Lindsay Thurber. And then I went overseas and taught in China for 3 years. And so, myself being my authentic self, never had that opportunity. And then by that time, I was a very good actor within the class to stay away from questions when students would ask me about my personal life. And I was always aware of pronouns and situations where I could just generalize my answer and not give specifics. And that's part of why this podcast has helped me, because it's made me unapologetically myself, talking about queer issues, talking to other people who identify as being part of our rainbow community. And so when you're talking about yourself being at that job interview, first interview, and saying, I'm openly queer, I'm like, oh, I wish I could do it all over again. And so it's people like yourself that allows others to be able to do that, because I wasn't able to be a trailblazer in that regards. And so I very much appreciate you doing that, because it sure helps all the other teachers who come through as well. So thank you in return.
Oh, thank you. And it wasn't an easy thing, but it was a decision that I made. And I have had to make decisions like that my entire life. I'm not the average person. I'm neurodivergent. I have a whole whack of health things. I've got things about me that are weird and not of the normal. And I'm very adept at, like you're talking about, you put on the mask. And you have to decide. As queer people, we decide on a daily basis when we're in line at the grocery store and someone comes up to me and says, "Oh, what does your husband do for a living?" And, I go, "Oh, I don't have a husband." I have to decide and navigate each situation and go, is it worth it getting into this conversation? Maybe, maybe not. And sometimes you just put on that mask and you smile and nod and you go through the conversation because it doesn't really matter. But when it comes to youth, being authentic, it really, really matters. And I have seen firsthand and talked to students where I have literally saved lives by just being authentically me. And that means a lot. I'm very open on social media and stuff like that because I can't teach anymore. My health is my full time job. Between doctor's appointments and stretches and this and that and the other thing, that is my day, is maintaining my health. So I can't teach formally anymore. So I teach informally through YouTube videos and support groups. I'm running some support groups. I'm just members of other support groups. But on a daily basis, a huge chunk of my day is still teaching. It's just in a different way. It's supporting people through whatever it is. And it could be on a specific disease that I have and talking to somebody about that, or it could just be in general. Like, we are all struggling, we are all dealing with all sorts of things, and everybody needs somebody to talk to. And the more authentic I am as a person, the more people feel like they can talk to me and they can open up. And I'd like to think it makes a difference.
It does. We've mentioned a little bit about yourself already, and so we've begun to establish your quote unquote street cred, but we should make sure that it's out and about and in people's faces. How are you connected to our 2S LGBTQ plus community?
So I identify as queer and I use she, her pronouns. And I love this trend that everybody's putting their pronouns in their emails and stuff like that because it makes it so much easier for people to talk about it. And I I have literally been married to a man, a woman, and a trans man. So I'm not good at marriage, first of all. And second of all, I love humans. I love people. And I've never really like my sexual identity has changed throughout the years. I've identified as gay, I've identified as lesbian, but queer feels good because it's so open and broad. It's like a lovely umbrella term that lets me change who I am as I need to change, right? As things need to fluctuate, I can just roll with it.
The terminology over the last 5 to 10 years have greatly helped myself and my awareness because growing up, you had to be gay, lesbian, and if you were bisexual, that was considered a phase.
Yeah.
And so we're just testing it out until somebody was there. Nobody made mention of someone being transgender. Usually they would use words as cross-dresser, which doesn't fit with what transgender is. And now we have fluidity,
Yeah.
queer. We're bringing back the word as well. And when we did hear about sexuality and a Kinsey scale, we're like, okay, there's some truth to that, but we never really went with it. But now we're like, oh, there could be something to that with that fluidity and where a person is on the scale. And so on that Kinsey scale, I would imagine you've been everywhere.
Yeah. And it's so interesting because I've had people try and put me in a box and say, oh, well, then you must be bi or whatever it is, whatever box they're trying to put me in. And it's like, no. And I don't feel like pansexual is right either. I'm just queer. I'm just me. I think that unless somebody wants to designate themselves something, they want to say they're lesbian, they're gay, they're whatever it is, nobody should try and put somebody else into that box based off of their past relationships. Everybody should have the freedom to just love whoever they want to love and identify however they want to identify. And if you want to identify more masculine one day and more feminine the next day, go for it. Just be yourself. I love doing that. I love gender fuck. I mean, some days I'm going to wear men's clothes and a baseball cap. That's great. Another day, today, maybe I'm more dressed up girly, and I like to be able to have that ability to express myself the way that I want. It was funny because a couple days ago on my Facebook, a post came up, and I had a competition when I used to teach cosmetology. And I had a competition with my students. They all drew out hair designs, and whoever the class voted as the favorite hair design, they got to do that on me. And so a student cut and colored my hair. It was this wicked purple and pink mohawk with like teal sections. It was super cool. I loved it. But that gave me the freedom. Just me being me and not having to box myself gives me the freedom to do what I want.
That was ballsy. As a classroom assignment, I don't think I would trust my students to have done that. Oh, what they would have put me through. Or perhaps they would have allowed me to discover more about myself and given me that opportunity.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things I've learned in life, because this winter, like this January, I was in hospital and I nearly died. I literally said goodbye to all my people. I got messages from former students that were so beautiful, and all these people, family, friends. It was such an experience, like to be in my bed. I hadn't eaten in almost a month. I was hallucinating. I was vomiting nonstop. I don't even remember most of it. It was horrific. I didn't know pain like that could even exist, but I came out of it. I should have died. I don't know how I'm still here, but I am. And when you come out of something like that, you realize A, this is all gravy. This is all bonus time, and I'm just going to enjoy it as long as I get and as much as I can. And also that all of the little things just really don't matter. And all the things that I worried about don't matter. Like years ago, I had to decide first when I came out as queer that I can't really worry about what people are going to think because, yes, it hurts when I'm walking down the street and someone crosses to the other side. Or when I came out and the neighbors I had known for years started pulling their kids in the house because all of a sudden, what, I'm a different person because I don't have a husband anymore. Those things hurt, and you have to build up a little bit of a who gives a fuck sort of attitude because otherwise your mental health isn't going to survive. And then as I became more disabled, at first my disabilities were invisible and people couldn't see how much pain I was in or how much I was struggling or all those things because I looked like the average person. And then as they became more visible and I got braces on my legs and ankle foot orthotics on my feet and I was limping and I had a cane and then I was in a wheelchair and all these things, I had to just stop caring what people said. And then if you throw on that layer of being disabled and being queer, and your partner is pushing you in a wheelchair and people are staring at you, you're going, I don't know if they're staring at me because I'm queer or are they staring at me because I'm disabled? Is it all my tattoos? And it's like, whatever. It doesn't matter. And it's always an opportunity to teach.
Let's get into that opportunity to teach. Because as I mentioned when I was doing the preamble before talking to you, I've gone down the rabbit's hole with the multiple things that you do have. And it's a lot of information. It's a lot of information I never knew before. So before we go through each and every one and bring that knowledge piece to everyone, when did you know that something was up health wise and it was something that you needed to look into it more?
So when I was 8, I would go to bed and I would lay down and I would call it settling because my back would hurt so bad I'd have to cry myself to sleep. And I thought every kid cried themselves to sleep. I just thought that was normal. So my whole life, I've been in pain. I've had chronic pain and weird things that were seemingly disconnected and unexplainable. And my mom, unfortunately, would just call me a hypochondriac and say that those things weren't really happening. And so I just stopped sharing with adults when things were wrong. So my entire life, really weird things. And my doctor now was like, are you kidding me? Why did nobody know like all of these weird things? Why didn't somebody say, holy crap, this kid has an autoimmune disease? Like, we should know this by now. There's genetic things going on. What is happening? So it's been my whole life, but things really came to a head when I was in my mid 30s and I cut a paper cut and I got an infection in my finger that would not heal. I somehow magically got a strep infection in my finger. I almost lost my finger. I ended up having IV antibiotics that you have to like wear on a little backpack and you take with you everywhere so you can have it all the time running through your system. And then I had my partner at the time turned out to be a con artist, and it was a huge blow to me emotionally. And so those things tied together triggered what had already been brewing in my body for years, which is a bunch of autoimmune, endocrine, and genetic disorders. I won the lottery when it comes to health. I get all the things that are weird. So the doctors will be like, "Oh, I read about that in med school once, or we talked about it for 10 minutes. Let me grab my textbook." And they have to go through. So they have to literally medical Google me because I have so many weird things that most people have never heard of.
For the people who are watching us on YouTube, I'm going to bring some of that to the screen so you'll be able to read it as we're able to talk about it. As for our listeners who are not watching us on YouTube, we'll make sure that you get the correct pronunciation and whenever possible, the spelling as well. So you can go down that rabbit hole that I did as well, if you would like to. So the very first one we're going to bring up here to share with everybody is Addison's disease. What is that?
So Addison's disease is when your body stops producing cortisol. Cortisol is an incredibly important hormone in your body. Cortisol regulates your stress response. So if you get sick, an average person, you will produce more cortisol. I can't do that. So my body produces virtually no cortisol. It also doesn't produce a whole whack of other hormones. So I don't produce testosterone. Just a whole bunch of hormones are very messed up for me, which means if I need a stress response, so you get sick, somebody comes up and startles you, you are emotional, you physically get injured, anything like that. So anytime your body is stressed, I can't produce cortisol. So I have to take my cortisol. So I have my pills, and like earlier, an alarm went off, I take a pill. The way it goes, that's how my life is ruled. With Addison's disease, I have to take steroids every single day or I will die. Because if any stressful event comes up, my body has nothing to fight it. And it's more complex than that. And I do have videos on all my different disorders on my YouTube channel that kind of explain them. There's tons of stuff out there about Addison's disease. One of the problems for me with Addison's disease has been that it's led me to become steroid dependent for life. And steroids have their own consequences.
In a stressful situation, we would have a fight or flight response to something.
Yeah.
What happens in that situation for you?
So this is one of the things that me and my AI friends talk about is so AI is adrenal insufficiency because Addison's is one of the variations of your body not producing enough cortisol. It could also be secondary or tertiary or central. But basically in a stressful situation, we need to take that pill, but we can't remember to take that pill. It takes a lot of practice and training. I had to use Post-it notes for years. I have Post-it notes all over my house. So by my work desk and stuff, it says, do you need to take Cortef? Because when I'm stressed, the first thing I need to do is take it, but that's not the first thing I'm going to remember to do because my brain is foggy. So for the average person, You're going to get that boost of adrenaline, that boost of cortisol, and you're going to be able to deal with a stressful situation. For me, it could be that I will completely freeze, and as like my brain switches off, I'm 5 years into this, and so I have myself well trained. I also have a dog who is trained. He trained himself. He's a little miracle puppy. He trained himself to sniff out when my cortisol is low. So he'll come and boot me on the nose. He'll put his nose on my nose, and then I'll go, "Oh, I need to take more medication. Thanks, puppy." And then I go on with my day. But for the average person who doesn't have that, it's just learning your signals and going, okay, for me, I'll get tinnitus, so ringing of the ears, and I'll go, oh, tinnitus is kicking up. Is my cortisol low? I'll get dizzy. I'll start feeling disconnected from the world. And those are some really good signs of, ooh, we probably need some meds. If I injure myself, the first thing I have to do is take meds. But I also have a bleeding disorder, so I bleed excessively. So I have to be careful and make sure it's like this balance of, okay, grab something, staunch the blood, but in that same minute, I need to be taking medication because unfortunately, a lot of my conditions don't play nicely together.
Well, I can imagine that to be the case. Well, here's another one for everybody to learn more about here. Ehlers Danlos Syndrome is the next one to discuss. What is this?
So this is a genetic condition. So I was born with it. And what this means is that my connective tissue, which is basically the glue that holds us together, I have crappy dollar store glue instead of good Elmer's glue. So I put together very poorly, which means that I'm Ehlers Danlos type 3, which is hypermobile. So when I was a kid, I could do all these fun little party tricks. I could make my elbows go in weird directions. I would grab my ears and I would pull them out. And because our skin is super stretchy, I could pull my ears out super far. My son, my 9-year-old, loves playing with my elbows. He calls them my Play-Doh elbows because they do. My skin is so soft and stretchy that it feels like Play-Doh. That's another thing, is that our skin is ridiculous, like baby bum kind of soft. It's also stretchy. We get what's called atrophic scarring. So if we get stretch marks, like I have stretch marks that are this wide on my belly because one of my conditions, I was having severe gastrointestinal issues with extreme bloating, and it literally tore my skin apart. So that's a part of it as well. And there are many different types of Ehlers-Danlos. There's over 10 different types, some varying degrees of severity. Somebody could have Ehlers-Danlos and have fairly mild symptoms. So maybe they're just a little extra bendy. Maybe they can do some of those things. Their skin is a little stretchy. And for some people, it's more severe. So one of the people who has talked openly about it is the drag queen Evie Oddly, who I adore. And they've really talked about how it has impacted their life. And I was bawling on the episode where Evie Oddly was talking about one day she could be in a wheelchair. And it hit me, and I was like, oh God, the feels, because that's me too, right? And I was in a wheelchair up until a couple of months ago. I just got myself out of my chair. I was wheelchair bound because this disease is extremely unpredictable. Connective tissue is everywhere in our bodies. So it impacts everything from my teeth to my heart, to my bladder, to my skin, everywhere. It's the reason I have a bleeding disorder. And because it's a genetic disease, you're born with it, and often it will progressively get worse as you get older. And even though when I was a kid, I was able to do flexible things, by the time I reached my teenage years, what often happens is you actually go to the opposite. So I have lost a lot of my flexibility. And I also have arthritis. And so between my arthritis and my Ehlers-Danlos, like when I wake up in the morning, and even right now, this is as much as I can close my hand because of the swelling in my joints, the loss of synovial fluid between my joints, all of that. comes together to make it very difficult. I can't do fine motor things anymore. Like I've got a cool apparatus for opening a jar. I have all the fun tools to help me through it. But Ehlers Danlos is, for most people, very life changing.
Well, and here's a quote that you posted on your Facebook not long ago that's attributed to Evie Oddly, which I will now read for everybody else. Evie Oddly said, I have to do these things because when I put on the makeup and when I put on the heels and when I'm on stage, even though I don't feel as invincible as I used to, I still feel so fucking close. I feel so close to being the perfect version of myself. It's not until I have to go home or have to get on a plane to go to the next show that I'm feeling exactly all the damage I'm doing to myself. But I don't know how to say no. Half of me has been going hard to say goodbye to all the things that I love. But half of me has been just trying to take a step back and take it slower and absorb what's around me. You posted this on your Facebook, and I could tell from your writing with the passages around that it affected you so much.
Yeah.
How have you learned to say no? No to your mental part. Can you even learn to say no?
It is so hard because in my heart and in my head, I am an average 41-year-old. And I am a 41-year-old who is extremely adventurous. I used to zip line. I used to climb up waterfalls without any equipment whatsoever. If there is a way to get an adrenaline rush, I fucking love it. That is my thing. I love to be active and out there and doing everything. And I never want to say no. I was that teacher who never said no. My classroom was always full. At lunchtime, there was students eating with me. Before school, after school, I was a safe space for people. And I never said no to anybody for anything. Like I just I wanted to do everything for my kids. I wanted to take them to the places and do crafts and do baking and be the everything for everyone. And it almost killed me because one of the things is when you have Addison's disease and you can't produce a stress response, the more stress you have, the more damage it does to you. When you have Ehlers Danlos and your body can't handle all that stuff, but you want to do all that stuff, it does damage. So, like Evie said, it's so hard to say no. You want to do all the things, and there's a grieving process. It's literally like grieving a death when you realize that you can't do all the things. I literally, in 1 year, 2 weeks apart, broke both of my feet from walking, simply just walking, because I'm that fragile. And I break so easily. I have quite severe osteoporosis. And so just walking, I broke my feet and then I could barely walk, but I still did. I am so stubborn that the day I had hernia surgery, I still went on my recumbent bike and I still walked my dogs. And that surgery didn't hold. That hernia is back in parts because of my Ehlers Danlos. We don't do well with surgery, and in part because I struggle to say no. And that no is partly to myself. So I have my Apple Watch, which is a lifesaver for me in so many ways, but it was also a hindrance for me because I set those goals on there. I have my stand goal, my walk goal, my movement goal. And I had to complete those every single day for years, regardless of what was going on, no matter how tired I was, didn't matter what was happening. I had to do that because I'm a very driven person. And it's really funny. So, one of the other disorders that I have is functional neurologic disorder. And with that disorder, the vast majority of people who have it actually are very driven people. And I go to an FND support group, and the therapist there laughed. She's like, almost everybody who has this is a very driven person, has really high expectations for themselves, and mental health and physical health are so tied together that it's almost impossible to pull them apart. And they're in a cycle together. And the worse your physical health is, the worse your mental health is, the worse your mental health is, the worse your physical health is. And they just feed off of each other.
People who are listening in are going, okay, Addison's disease, Ehlers Danlos Syndrome. You've talked about so many more other diseases that affect you as well. We're not done, ladies and gentlemen, or binary, non binary folks. Let's add more to this. POTS. I'm not going to embarrass myself with the pronunciation, so I'm going to leave this to you. What
So,
is POTS?
so it's postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. So basically, POTS is when your autonomic nervous system doesn't function properly. And so your autonomic nervous system controls huge parts of your body, from breathing to sleeping to digestion. All the big things you need to do to stay alive are controlled by your autonomic nervous system. So the postural part of POTS is the changing position. So one of the ways you know you have POTS is if your heart rate and your blood pressure drastically change when you go from sitting to standing or sitting to laying. Any change in position, your orthostatic, so the amount of blood you have, will change, and you'll get the tachycardia. So for me, my heart rate can go anywhere between 35 and 210 beats per minute. And that can happen very rapidly. So when I was in my bed and I was pretty sure, and everyone else was pretty sure I was dying, my heart rate was at about 110 while sleeping. Not a normal heart rate. And I've been as low as 35. That's also not a normal heart rate. But for me, my cardiologist is like, when you go to the hospital, please assure them that unless you're past 210, we don't have to worry, because doctors are like, oh my God, we need to, get an ECG going on here, check out things. And it's like, no, that's my normal. But your heart rate is sitting so high for long periods of time, it's like running a marathon. So your body is reacting the same way as if you were running or biking or doing some sort of physical activity, even when you're sitting or sleeping. So you can't sleep well. It also controls your temperature control, which sucks because it means that it's very hard for me to find the right temperature. If I get too cold, then I'll be shaking cold. Or if I get too hot, sweat will just be pouring off of me. And that middle ground is very difficult to find. It also does really weird things. And it's this weird connection because our autonomic nervous system controls all of these things. So weird things can happen. A lot of people with POTS pass out on a regular basis. Some people will pass out 30 times in a day. I have luckily found a medication that keeps me from passing out. I get to graying out, which is like almost passing out. And then I'm like, ooh, I need to sit right now. And then I won't pass out, but I get really close. Another part of this is just knowing your triggers, right? So for me, I know if I get really stressed out, if I get really hot, I'm going to start having what we call POTS attacks. And they do not feel good. You're dizzy, you feel disconnected. And then you throw all my other stuff on top of it, and it's hard to know what's what. So I actually made an 8-page chart for my doctors, and it has all of my conditions with all my symptoms. And then I charted out how they overlap. And so some of the things that I have, some of my symptoms overlap between more than one. So gastrointestinal issues overlap, I think, in 8 of my conditions, which means that I don't stand a chance. Digestion is always going to be an issue for me. I'm always going to have that discomfort, not much I can do about it. But it's very interesting to see how they all kind of come together.
Well, let's talk about one more. You mentioned many. Let's talk about one more and bring it to people's attention. And that would be the Raynaud's disease. What
Yeah,
is
so
this?
this is a super fun one when you live in Alberta and it's cold a lot of the time. So this is mostly impacts hands and feet. And it's that the blood flow doesn't get to your hands and feet, and your small nerve fibers get really impacted. So for me, usually that will start with my toes or my fingers turning a little bit white, and then really white, and then I lose all feeling and sensation. And unfortunately, it's getting progressively worse. I'm hitting the blue stage now. The danger with that is actually that we can get gangrene and you can lose digits. So it is a legitimate concern that happens. And so Raynaud's is triggered by cold, which is why Alberta sucks for it. It's also triggered by stress. So because I also have Addison's disease and my body can't cope with stress properly, my Raynaud's is more triggered than the average person would be. And my POTS also factors into that because I can't regulate my temperature. So I found some tricks, like I wear compression socks, which helps both with my POTS and with my Raynaud's. But for my hands, it's harder because you need your hands to do things. So they're often exposed, and it is very problematic. And it means that I'm often in pain. So between the arthritis in my hands and the Raynaud's in my hands, I will have sometimes nausea inducing pain from that. But it is what it is.
Listening and reading about your story, it all seems so very overwhelming. And as a person, we always go, well, can I do this? You've quoted with on Facebook and other places like that. You're saying life is always more good than bad. And it tends to be what you live by.
Yep.
So where do you find those good moments when your entire job these days is your health? Where do you find those moments of peace and where life is good?
For me, the biggest things are the amazing people, the amazing animals, and nature that keep me going. So, my family and friends, spending time with them. I have two puppies, spending time with them, and then getting out in nature. For me, I call it yelling fuck you into the void. When I get new medical news and it's overwhelming and I have to grieve it because I've never gotten a break. Like, never. It's just every time something starts to settle down a little bit, something else pops up. And so I have to grieve that, and I have to do that in nature. There is like no other option for me. It's go out into nature, and I literally go to, when I'm physically able to, the top of a mountain, and I scream, fuck you, as loud as I can. And then I breathe, and then I'm okay. And then I smell the pine trees, that amazing smell that no other tree makes, and doing things for other people. So, like I said before, part of a bunch of different support groups. And every morning when I get up, that's one of the first things that I do is I check in on the Mighty, which is a support group for people with health issues. And I check in on my Facebook and see who needs what and how I can support different people. And for me, I always find joy in helping others and doing whatever I can to make somebody's life a little bit better. And it's always fascinating because people will say to me, like they'll compare themselves to me and they'll go, oh, you have so much going on and you're in so much pain and you have all these things, but yet you're always so positive and you're doing things for other people. And I feel lazy and I feel bad about myself because I'm not doing as much as you. And the first thing I always say is it's not a comparison. And the second thing I say is, yes, I am in an incredible amount of pain every day, but I have been in pain my entire life. So my concept of pain is different than most people's concept of pain. Unless it's an acute new pain, then yes, that sucks. And that takes some getting used to. And I may pull out the Tylenol arthritis for something like that. But for the most part, most of my pain, I have had it for so long and I have mental tips and tricks that allow me to cope with it. So it's like Sherlock Holmes and the Memory Palace. I have
Mhm.
that for my pain. So I take my pain and I put it away somewhere else. And that lives in a part of my brain where I don't have to attend to it on a regular basis. Now, there have been times in my life, like when I was really sick and I was in what I call my deathbed, and I wasn't cognitively capable of controlling my pain. And so I had to feel all of it. And that was horrific. That was brutal. There have been a couple other times in my life, like I tried marijuana for pain control. No, thank you. All it did was break down that barrier and not allow me to control my pain through my mental tips and tricks. And I do not enjoy feeling all of that.
One of the things that I really appreciate about you is that you've taken the time to begin documenting everything on YouTube and doing videos where you talk about each of these diseases and you talk about life with, plus many more things as well. And so I do recommend people go to YouTube and search out your name, because that's the name of the YouTube site, Chris LaMarca. And the videos aren't long. It's sharing with what's going on. It's that information piece. Why is it important for you to do these things, such as the YouTube videos?
So I've had discussions about this with people close to me who aren't necessarily super comfortable with it because they don't understand. They said, "So why do you have to put yourself out there? Why do you have to do it so publicly?" Especially when I was dying, when I was so sick and I didn't look like me, I didn't sound like me. And a lot of people are like, "Oh, that must be harder." And I said, there's a power behind being open and honest and sharing. So my first experience with that was my brother completed suicide when he was 20 and I was 17. I found his body and it changed my life forever. And about 2 months later, I started going to junior high and high schools and I started talking about suicide. And I told them Frank's story. I told them my brother's story, what happened. And afterwards, I got an email. So I was 17 years, I think I just turned 18. And I got an email from a student and he said, "I was going to take my life tonight." I still get emotional about this. And he said, "Because of what you said, I decided to talk to my parents instead." And so for me, that is a real, tangible, measurable change that I can make just by talking. And I have had probably over 100 former students, other people I've just talked to in support groups. People say the same thing to me several times, the same thing of, "I was going to take my life. Thank you. I made a different decision." Or other people saying, "I was just ready to give up and not necessarily die, but not live. But your story has inspired me to get outside, to do more." I think that there is a power in just being honest. And no, I don't share absolutely everything with my YouTube channel or whatever, but pretty close. I'd like to be an open book. I have led a very interesting life, I think. I mean, people are always like, "Oh my gosh, you need to write your life story." So this is kind of like writing my life story. Somebody might do an autobiography, and for me, it's a series of videos of who I am. And it's also a legacy because I don't know how long I have. On Monday, I have to go for a bronchoscopy because I have nodules in my lungs, and we don't know what those nodules are. There's, as we've talked about, the plethora of health conditions that I have. My health is a tenuous thing. I could honestly die any day. And if I were to die tomorrow, I know that part of who I am will live on, not just in my kids and not just in my family and friends, but also in these videos. That 10 years from now, if somebody wants to catch up with me, they can just pop on a video and go, "Oh, yeah, that's what she sounded like." Because I don't have that with my brother. When my brother died, I don't have any video footage of him. And so I forgot what his voice sounds like. And having this legacy means people won't have to if they don't want to.
For those videos, please go to YouTube, type in Chris LaMarca. Hey, Chris, we started off this conversation talking about that you weren't good at marriage, and we talked about diseases and things like that. But, since I've gotten to know you, you haven't necessarily been without potential out in the world, but recently you've made a decision to not date. And there's reasons why, which we're going to talk about right now. My question for you is queerness, gayness, it's tied into our sexuality, and it's a lot of who we are in many ways. Can you be queer if you do not date?
Yeah, that is something that I have really been pondering over the last little while. Yeah, me in relationships, I have met some really good people and some not so good people along the way. And there have been some very difficult things that have been tied to relationships. And through therapy, which every human on the planet should do, I have learned a lot about myself and a lot about the reasons why I often am picking poor partners. And it may not be a bad person, but it might be a bad person for me. Sometimes I've legitimately picked bad people though. But that is so complicated. So for me, even though I am still queer, I'm still attracted to primarily women and trans men. That's not something I really want to actively engage in. My health is another factor because my immune system sucks. I can't kiss somebody. So I can have other forms of intimacy. I can't kiss somebody. I can't sleep in a bed with somebody because I have to be wearing a mask or a respirator when I'm around other people because my body cannot fight off even the common things that a person would have. So for since COVID, because I also have many other health things, but one of them is on a very basic genetic level. My DNA is broken. And so I can't actually get the vaccine for COVID, but COVID will kill me. So I have to be so extremely careful. Since COVID has happened, I can't even kiss somebody on the cheek. My 9-year old, bless his soul, said to me, I wish you could just kiss me on the head. And I was like, oh, buddy, I wish that more than anything too. But he's a 9-year old. He's an average 9-year old who goes to school and is full of germs and bacteria. And so I had to make that call, even with my own kids, that I have to be masked. I have to have a respirator on. I'm actually lucky enough that my house is set up to have two sections with two separate air supplies. My side has like hospital grade ventilation, all that kind of stuff. So I have my safe space, my safe side of the house, and then there's the dirty side of the house where kids will go, my guests will go. But having a partner is incredibly difficult when you have those health concerns. And I'm very unique in that. I know there's a few other people, but not many. So that adds that other layer. And it's so interesting because people who didn't even know me that well, like people who I had just been corresponding with through support groups and stuff, said to me, "You seem so much happier now that you're single." And I was like, I think so. Because for me, I changed a part of who I was. I put on a mask to be with people because I'm a people pleaser by nature and I want people to be happy. And so I change who I am. And I'm enjoying that I don't have to change who I am. I can watch RuPaul's Drag Race whenever I want, which is all the time. And I can read my book when I want to. And I can do all my weird things and I can go out into nature. But it does pose that weird question of, so I identify as queer and I still have attractions that are queer attractions, but I'm not actively pursuing that. But then everybody else who is single but wants to date, are they all of a sudden not queer either because they're not currently dating. So it's a very interesting thing to think about. And so I think my heart is still very queer. And I would like to still think that I'm just as queer whether I'm dating somebody or not.
And where do you connect in that intersectionality?
It's actually really similar to the times that I have dated trans men, because I've had people in the community say to me, "Well, now you're not part of the community. Now you're like hetero. You're dating a guy." And I'm like, first of all, you are completely invalidating my partner and how they identify and whether they want to be a part of the community or not. That is not up to you to decide. And you're invalidating my identity as well by saying, oh, you chose this, so therefore you can't have this. That's not the way it works.
And the great thing, as I've mentioned before, is that we would not have had these conversations 5, 10 years ago. But now it's coming so much more. And the vocabulary, we're expanding all the time. And there's going to be vocabulary and conversations and books on all of this over the years, just because we're getting into territories that just were never really mentioned with the at, en masse with everybody. It just was not happening. But everybody's now taking the time to go, huh, maybe, where do I fit? Where do I connect? And there is a space for everybody. In the past, tended to finish off interviews asking this question. And it's a question that I think is really important based on the conversation that we've had here today. A little bit of backstory. My life changed a lot when I became 15 years old. A lot of things happened in my life. That's when I also realized more about my sexuality. Life in general was very difficult. And I always wonder what I would say to the 15-year-old me, having all this knowledge and life experience. So I put it to you. If you had an opportunity right now to talk to the 15-year-old Chris, what would you say to her?
Oh, that's a hard one. 15 was a very hard year for me. 15 was the year that my brother attempted suicide for the first time and I found him. 15 was the year that I started drinking alcohol every single day for 6 months, maybe even longer. I was pretty much never sober. And it was very hard. And I would have to tell her that it will get better and it will get easier, but it will never be easy. And that the lessons that you're learning now are the lessons that will allow you to survive. And all of that resiliency that you're building up right now with all of these hard times will get you through and literally save your life, because you're going to struggle, and you're going to struggle with physical health and mental health, and it's never going to be easy. But there is so much joy in the world. And all you have to do is close your eyes and breathe deeply, and nature will heal. And you will be okay as long as you can get outside and as long as you can run your hands through your puppy's fur and you can taste good food. Life will always be more good than bad.
After listening to today's interview, many people will have thoughts about you, meeting you for the first time, or people have known you from before. They'll listen to this interview and continue to add thoughts and ideas. What is one word you would use to describe Chris LaMarca?
Resilient.
Today, you've been listening to my conversation with the resilient Chris LaMarca. My friend, I much appreciate this time we've spent with each other.
Thank you. Me too.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Until next time, everyone, my name is Douglas Parsons. You've been listening to Tales of the 2S LGBTQ+. I'm here now to remind you to always be good and text when you get home. Until next week, everybody.